Daniel, lead us back through a conversation. Now, this is the question for everybody. I know Hannah has an opinion. I know Bob Timlin has an opinion. I know Matt Owens, but I'm sure everybody else does too. If America's failing, this is the question. How do we decouple from the economy in the dollar? Now, I know some people think the American dollar isn't going to fail. Okay, this is a hypothetical conversation. If it does, how do we save ourselves as Californians? How do we insulate our economy? How do we make sure that we're able to move along economically? We've never had this conversation. Hannah, Matt had a conversation on how California gets international recognition. That was one of the best videos we ever did. So I'd like to hear from everybody for a few minutes. If the dollar's failing, or maybe it's not failing, but the US economy doesn't appear stable, how do we decouple and save ourselves? I'm going to kick it back to you. Daniel, please lead people through and let's see some opinions.
Okay. Just a small note. I know maybe some of us, including myself, I'm not an economist, and you know, I don't have the correct knowledge of international, national, so I will skip my turn. Just wanted to say that I've been involved with California public banking, which has passed, by the way. It's pretty stagnant right now. I don't know what's happening with it, but for me, that's my interest right now, the localized, having our public banks, because initially when I talked to people about it that were involved with it, the benefits would be that instead of putting our money as Californians into a corporate bank that uses it for wars, for whatever they want, we would be able to have the banks use that for California communities, in their community, for projects, for infrastructure, for things like that. And we would be bypassing the corporate hold on our money and what they do with it, which we don't agree with, wars, whatever, and stuff. So that's a huge important thing for me, is to really establish a public California bank where we don't get fleeced by fees, by, you know, whatever they want to do to us, so that we have some kind of control of our money, or at least have the choice to go to California public banking. If you want to go to Bank of America, fine, but to have that choice at least. So that's all I'm going to say on that. But also, if like other people are not, you know, that savvy or don't have an opinion, feel free to say that and to give your time to someone else. I just wanted to say that because it's a pretty, I mean, there's a knowledgeable like Hal, people, Hannah, but it's a pretty comprehensive topic, economics, and, you know, whether we go to crypto, whether we go to this, whether it's very complex, you know, subject. So anyways, I'm going to pass on now, again, go around. Oh, wait, we got Walter that wants to speak. Walter, I'm going to unmute you. You'll go first.
Okay. Just a brief point. In the American Revolution, when they were revolting against the British Empire, they did not have their own currencies, but they used the currencies of other countries. They used the currencies of Spain, of France, of different countries. And so I wonder if that could be at least a temporary option. We have, you know, very stable currency with Canada. You have Canadian gold coins, you have Canadian banknotes, and I think the Mexican pesos are pretty stable. So at least temporarily, I would say that, you know, we would have that option, or somebody suggested the euro as an option as well. So, you know, why couldn't we at least start out with just some of these other stable currencies? I would recommend that we go ahead and recognize the U.S. Washington quarter and the Franklin Roosevelt dime, but get rid of nickels and pennies, which are nothing but a nuisance to people and pretty much worthless anyway with the inflation going on now. So in other words, we could just use the quarter and the dime for the small things so that we don't waste resources on having to produce coins, and then just go with Mexico or Canada or the euro in the meantime. Or somebody made a really good suggestion. I think it was Bob about doing trade deals with China or Russia or however they had done it. I thought that was a really good idea. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Walter.
Can I go?
Yes, Shankar, let me.
Yeah, sorry. I'm like in between watching 4 kids here and feeding them lunch and doing this meeting. So look, just real quick, I'll make this real quick. So look, yeah, the right now for some reason the Wall Street, the market's doing great, which doesn't match reality. The fact that we have so much unemployment. Gee, I wonder what's propping it up. Could it be that they're borrowing $1 trillion a day from the Fed? They're borrowing every single day $1 trillion, paying it back before midnight at 0% interest, and then borrowing it again the next morning just to survive. All it's going to take is one something to just take away the value of the U.S. dollar for the entire Wall Street market to crash. Look, in saying that, I live in Orange County. Or I live in Long Beach now, but almost Orange County. And I can go to the Subway in Santa Ana and pay for my Subway sandwich in pesos. I can go to La Puente, and there's some places there that take like one. So California already has this culture of accepting of wide diversity of currency, because we know you're not from here and you just came here. And if this is all the money that you have, we have a bank that will exchange it for the currency that we want. So you can pay however you want. They even have the pricing to match the currency that you're in at the Subway in Santa Ana. So if the dollar does collapse, okay, great. That's all I got to say.
Thanks, Shankar. Anybody want to go next? I'm just going to take.
I'd like to go. I'm waiting.
Okay. Okay.
Go to Hannah.
Okay. Hannah and then Hal.
Yeah, I'll try to make this quick. Number one is because I grew up in Minnesota, and there the Canadian coinage is just floating all over the place. You look in your pocket, oh, there's some Canadian coins. Nothing up to this, usually not anything beyond the quarter, but we get the quarter, we get the dime, we get the nickel. And that's a good point that Shankar makes. Basically, people will use the coinage they want. There's no way of doing it. Your concern about money is concerned about foreign trade and concerned about payments to the government. It's a misnomer, by the way, that someone has to accept your U.S. dollar. U.S. dollar is actually only required to be accepted by the United States government. Fun fact. Another thing is, however, I look at it, okay, now remember, we're working under the presumption that the United States dollar has collapsed, which really means its value is so small, or it's being manipulated by political actors, which by the way, we much accuse the Chinese of doing. So my concern would be economic stability is more important than nationalism, and more important than controlling our own currency. It's more important that we have a solid currency that can be used to help our doing foreign trade, and of course our payments to government, so our government can go and buy stuff on the open market. I know from experience that most of the countries in the world actually have their own currency. But what that tends to create is a sort of a two-level system. They'll even call it hard currency versus soft currency. And maybe sometimes make it impossible for you to translate. You know, if you're a citizen of the country like Venezuela, it's impossible to change your money into a hard currency because that's considered suspicious. We don't want that. So I think it's more important to have a hard currency. Now, the reason why I believe the euro would be the number 2 choice for a currency for independent California is because that's the number 2 stable currency on the world market. And it may seem, you know, that's not to put down the Mexican peso or the Canadian loon. Well, that's right, they call it the Canadian dollar. Sorry, slang. We call it the loonie. But the loon, the Canadian dollar, but it's just saying that, yeah, euro. And by the way, I also believe, I don't know if I want to announce today, I just discovered that Donald Trump just announced he wants to remove 9,500 troops from Germany. And I know some of you are going to say, all right, we're getting out of, it's good, America's becoming less, pulling troops out of foreign countries. Yeah, but you know who doesn't like that? The Chancellor of Germany, who was given no warning, no discussion, no nothing. It was another unilateral Trump decision. So I believe that as the United States sinks below the sea, below the surface, they will be very happy to see a stable government with responsible people running it in California. And when you take the euro, that means you become part of the European banking system. You know, they have European central banks. They all work together to keep their currency stable. And I also, you know, and I would like to see, I mean, Europe has a human rights system, by the way, that's enforced by international law, their international law. There's a lot of positive things they're doing in the EU. And I think that we're looking for stability. That's a source of it. They have our values in many respects. And in many ways, I think they have more, but our values are more in line with theirs than our values are with the majority of the United States. That's all I have to say. Euro, because it's a second choice. And we're assuming the dollar has been manipulated or there's so much economic chaos outside our borders that, you know, we have to choose another currency.
Thank you, Anna. Just a real quick question, because it's a learning experience for me. What would be the third currency? The Canadian dollar that you would suggest, or?
I would say I don't have to choose that because I don't see a situation in which there would be another need to a third choice. Is that blunt about it? I mean, yeah, there's the yen, you know, but I don't think I think the euro is going to would be the choice over the dollar. I think the world would choose that, by the way, that it would choose the dollar. Whether one more thing, someone thinks about gold. You know why you don't use gold or anything backed by gold? Because gold is inherently deflationary, and a currency, in order to make, is supposed to grow in size in relation to your economy growing. It's kind of very complicated math,
Yeah.
But that's the reason why the United States chose to leave the gold currency in the first place, because, you know, our dollar is no longer backed by gold. It's only because it's inherently deflationary, and you want a currency that slowly inflates around 2% a year. That's a very complicated macroeconomics. Is that a good answer?
Yes, thank you, Anna. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
So I'm going to go to Hal next. There you go, Hal.
Hello again. There's a few things that come into this. It's like there's an obvious point here that goes, California's economy compared to the United States is relatively stable, whether we're on the dollar or not. It's an argument that says that California, if there is a collapse, could buy up dollars and basically control the U.S. economy. Thus, we'd control their dollar anyway. I mean, as their dollar goes down, the dollars we hold, by comparison, would be worth a lot more. Not to mention the fact that since they will still be our #1 trading partner, and you know, when Bubba wants to buy that TV, if we control how much the value of his dollars in his pocket are worth, that's a lot of power. That's economic power. But I'm gonna put that aside for a moment. The discussion about coming up with our own currency, there's a question that goes, we may be discussing where to open up our Blockbuster video. Talk for years has gone on about basically currency now is virtual. What's in your bank account says dollars, but really it's points compared to however other points are in everybody else's accounts. When they charge you to convert your money into someone else's, they're charging you to make your points worth some other guy's points. I mean, and we're dealing with generations now that grow up on cards. I mean, they rarely see real dollars and quarters and what have you. I mean, it's just you insert the card, take the card out. So if the currency is already basically virtual, the idea of sort of a universal international currency probably isn't that far off. We may be going through the time, energy, hassle, etc. of developing a currency at a historical time when that's kind of becoming obsolete. And there are historical precedents for that. It's like in Europe, it's like, you know, it's like everybody knew how much the value of Roman coins were. Everybody knew how much the value of Spanish coins were, or German coins, or English coins. They knew, and they would trade them. At a time in our history when, like I said, money is becoming points on the board. Just, how many points you got? How many points you got? Coming up with trying to figure out how our currency reflects everybody else's might not be worth the effort. That's it for me.
So wait, Hal, so what's your point, that we should stick with the dollar, the American dollar, or that
We could. But the idea is that we talk about the devaluation of the dollar, or the value of the yen, or the value of the peso, or the stability of this and the stability of that, but or the euro. Well, eventually all of this stuff's being traded not by picking up big sacks of money and taking them someplace else. I mean, they just transfer numbers. We're kicking numbers around. There's no boat full of gold going across the Atlantic when we buy from Europe. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're saying not to really change the currency, because it's going to change eventually into a international standard.
Yeah. So maybe they'll be called units or credits or whatever other science fiction name you can pull out of your hat for them.
Cryptocurrency, whatever.
Well, it's kind of the idea of a cryptocurrency, but if it's a universally accepted currency, a universally accepted international currency, then that would ease trade logic across the world. And this has been something that's been under discussion for ever since computers first started making bank transfers virtual rather than economic. It's like not seeing the armored car moving big bags of dollars around as much as we used to. Right. Banks don't do that. They just shift the numbers. That's California's currency. So when I'm looking at a California currency for the future, probably the most logical would be a virtual currency that basically has its floating value system, depending on what internationally you would see, until we develop an international currency that no longer has to make those shifts.
Gotcha. Thanks, Hal, for that. And I'm gonna go. I saw Marcus. Raise his hand. So I'm going to go to you next, Marcus. Not you, Marcus. Not Marcus Ruick. The other Marcus.
So I actually really liked what Hal had to say, and I want to dovetail quite a bit on that. And that is, in my opinion, and I have opinions about a lot of things, including currency. But I think that a case could be made, especially in light of recent events with Brexit, that one of the things that allowed for Britain to leave the EU with very few problems is a stable currency, because they had not fully bought into the euro, and all of that. And so as California moves towards independence, I think that it is very important that you have a strategy of how to handle currency. That being said, I think that competing currencies are important. And one of the things that you will see if California becomes independent is you're going to have, even with your own currency, you're going to have two currencies anyway. Because there are going to be Californians. You already talked about that you have people using the peso, you have people using Canadian dollar, you have all of that going on. If you have competing currencies, if you have, if you say, okay, this is our official currency, this is the currency that we allow. And I agree with Hal that I think that things going towards more of a digital currency is the way forward, as can be seen with Bitcoin. And one of the things that you can do as a movement to get money, to get some capital moving your direction, and I mean for the movement, and move towards getting technologies that will get you a digital currency is marry up with the cryptocurrency people. Start reaching out to the Bitcoin people. Start reaching out to the people who have already done the groundwork. Maybe you wind up with the Cali or whatever it is. But if you have that cryptocurrency set in place, then you have a stable currency. But then as California gets its own sovereignty, say, we also accept the US dollar, we accept the euro, we accept these competing currencies, because the one downside to Bitcoin is that, and to any kind of cryptocurrency, is that if I'm out in the woods with no cell reception, and I realize y'all are in California and you don't have as much of that problems as I do here in Indiana, but if I'm out in the woods and I don't have access to the internet, I don't have access to my Bitcoin. So you're going to have cash flow moving from one person to another person, even if you have some kind of digital currency so you're going to have something trading back and forth. My guess is the most obvious choice would be the US dollar as kind of a black market kind of dollar moving forward. But it could be anything. You could create that thing. I don't know. But I really think that the CalExit movement, that your movement could benefit for reaching out to the crypto community, getting on blockchain, getting those kinds of motions moving on right now, so that when you have, and we need to start using those kinds of words, when you have an independent California, then you already have the people, maybe it's Bitcoin, maybe it's Monero, maybe it's Dash, any of these cryptocurrencies say, yep, we're ready to back them, we're ready to move in, we've already set it up, it's done. And then you can just easily transition to the next step. So that is my 2 cents on currency.
I think Marcus just gave us our another project here.
Yeah, great point, Marcus. And the one thing I got that I really liked is we should name that virtual money the Cali. I like that. The Cali. That sounds really good. I really like that. So that's a good thing to think about. But I see Matt. Matt Shenko, you wanted to say something real quick or not? Shenko, sorry, you're muted.
Hey,
you wanted
no,
to
yeah, agreeing with what Marcus says. I think that's a great idea. I mean, with the movement reaching out and actually creating a cryptocurrency, who cares if it's not worth anything right now? As long as we get that platform up and have a basic. Hold on, son. Yeah, I do. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about that. As long as we get that basic platform up and going, when after the iron hits, we'll have that to go, ready to go. And it'll just show that much more confidence to our constituents, our people, the people who are interested in it, that we do have a currency ready to go and it's able. We should start reaching out while it's in its infant stage right now. Crypto is. We should hit them up, because I think if the dollar collapses, getting into that, it will be a lot harder than it is right now. So we should establish that ASAP, I believe. Thank you, Marcus, for that. That's an excellent project idea. I'm definitely gonna look in on it. Thank you.
Shankar. I wanted Bob. Bob wants to say something real quick, and then Matt, it will be you.
Yeah, a couple of points. I agree with Hal and Marcus. A couple of points I might bring up is that the EU is our largest trading partner, and their economy collectively is actually the largest economy on the planet, larger than the US. So going with the euro temporarily would not be a bad idea. Our public bank, can our public bank support multiple currencies? I'm not sure if it can or not legally. Now the other issue is the cryptocurrency, the blockchain, totally agree. That's really the future. Paper money is going away. So really, I don't think California should produce a paper currency. Maybe until we get blockchain going, maybe the euro is the way to go. It's an interim way. I'm actually involved in a startup that's using blockchain. So it is the way. I mean, the Federal Reserve is scared of blockchain because it's likely, it could definitely take down the dollar, take down all the central banks. It's really, they're actually threatened by it. This is, because I'm a, a software engineer and I'm involved in a startup, and we're looking at basically using cryptocurrency as the method of payment. And you see a lot of startups doing that. So that is definitely the way of the future. In California, I mean, come on, we got half the top technology companies here. Technology is our middle name. We should be going with cryptocurrency. It's our middle name, technology, basically. So I definitely say long term, something like cryptocurrency, blockchain is the way to go. Short term, maybe the euro. That one's the one that seems to make the most sense. And maybe we could even offer a partnership with Europe, get some of the bigger states. For example, California and New York collectively combined are almost 25% of the U.S. economy. So you want to say there's 50 states? Okay, well, 2 of them combined are over 23% of the economy, right? So and New York's got all the financial centers. You could have a partnership between California, New York, a couple of other big states with Europe on a global currency. So you're talking about a global currency. I think you're right. There's going to be a global currency. So the dollar is fading. It's just a matter of time, really, in my opinion. So there's a couple of ideas. Euro, short-term, cryptocurrency, definitely. Maybe a partnership between California, New York, a few other big states, and Europe on a global currency. Those are kind of my thoughts.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Those are
Welcome.
a lot of things to think about. This is really interesting to me. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
So then I'm going to go to Matt, as I promised. Matt, you're
Thank
on.
you so kindly. Let's see if I can help here. Raise your hand if you've taken coursework in international trade and finance. It shows. Let me tell you how. Zeroth point has to do with the stock market zooming into the stratosphere. That could be a sign of the dollar's collapse, actually. How much are those zillions of dollars in the stock market really going to buy? So it may already be, I mean, it's decreasing, but it's not a crash sort of thing. But it is going down. It is shipping water. So yeah, we've got to get off at a dollar standard, and a public bank will be a necessity to market our currency. I'll call it the Cali too. So how do we market Calis? Well, first of all, you do 2 things. First, you have an initial, and this is based, by the way, on the experience of the euro and something else that nobody raised, which surprises me, but I guess it should. Okay. When they launched the euro, they did 2 things. First, they set initial value at a basket of currencies, European currencies. So they said, okay, we're going to launch X number of euro at this, and then go ahead and float it as a currency and try to get it accepted as a method of payment for the EU once we replace our national currencies with this basket of them we call the euro. Huzzah, it worked. It worked because they based it on a previous model, which is the one nobody's brought up, and that's the special drawing right of the IMF, which is why I would propose that our initial issue of the Cali be pegged to the value of the SDR, the XDR, the special drawing right. And then you float it out there. How do you get it out there? Once you've got an initial issue of Calis set at the value of an XDR, and then like the euro, you let it float. How do you float currency? Well, you take out as much circulation as you put in. Euro's at a disadvantage because they don't have a euro treasury that can tax it away. They're totally dependent on the member central banks to do that. The only other thing they can do is borrow, which they do, and they lend, which they do. The ECB, the European Central Bank, is totally dependent on the taxation authority of those that contribute to it. And the IMF is totally dependent on those contribute to it, and that's where they got the value of the special drawing right. So we start out indexing the Cali to the SDR, and then we float it. Well, one thing that is helpful to get that currency out there is to come to a series of agreements where you agree to currency swaps. This is what happened with the Russians and the Chinese. Okay, the Chinese had a bunch of dollars that they had earned that they were paying to the Russians for Russian oil and paying to the Saudis for Saudi oil and so on. Okay, so they run out of dollars. Their dollars were getting a little kind of short. and they ask, oh, pretty please, to all the OPEC members and non-OPEC members, like Canadians and Mexicans and Russians, and they ask them, would you pretty please accept our currency in payment rather than out of our dollar tranche? And the Russians said, yes, we will accept Chinese yuan on one condition. You accept rubles in payment for stuff that we import from China, and they go done. So they are now exchanging directly yuan and rubles, no dollars involved. We can do the same. We go to a country like, say, China or the EU that we are importing from heavily, and we ask, will you accept CALIs in payment? If you accept CALIs in payment for our imports, we'll accept your local currency, the yuan, the euro, the peso, whatever, in payment for exports. Okay? So we have currency swap agreements. And what will tend to happen will be that you have 2, 3, 4 countries that have CALIs floating around in them, like you have dollars floating around in them, and now yuan floating around in them. They begin to trade between each other, just like OPEC and the Chinese, both of which had oodles of dollars, trade dollars between each other. That's why price of oil is still set in greenbacks. So that's how you get our currency out. There's a series of swap agreements like the Russians and the Chinese did that says, sure, we'll accept, when we export to you, we'll accept your currency provided you accept ours. That's how you get it out there. And that's how you do it, folks. That's how you float the CALI as a viable international convertible currency.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for reminding me why I hated economics in college. but I did get something out of it. Thank you. So we're gonna go next. It's Joe didn't get a chance. Oh wait, we got first question from Walter, I think. Wants to say something real quick.
Yeah. Yes, just a brief question. It seems to me that it's not only a question of currency, but of wealth that's going to back it. And how are we going to do that? One possible suggestion that I've heard is to encourage people for their taxes for 2020, their federal taxes, to declare no dependents, so that the other way, to declare lots of dependents, so that then there's not much money taken out, so that then next April, when it's time to do your taxes, where you owe so much taxes to the federal government, instead of sending that check to the Internal Revenue Service, encourage people to just send that check to the California Franchise Tax Board, and that would be a way to get money into the account that would help to serve to launch the independent government.
Interesting. Thanks, Walter, for that. And then I'm gonna go to Joe. Do you want to?
Yeah.
Say something about this?
Yeah, thank you. Real quick, I just wanted to clarify the point I was making earlier, and I'll be brief. I think what I was disagreeing with is more of the rule as a point of the speaker to speak. That I understand to like stay on topic and things like that. I just think keep in mind that California culture is to be as inclusive as possible. And that the larger that this movement grows, the more pushback you're going to have on things like that. But I definitely use it as a point of sale. I'm not saying that. I think if the movement, wants to make the, to say this is what we agree, or this is what most of our members agree with, something like that, that's fine. Hey, I have no problem with that. I just think that to keep it as a point of speaking, I kind of disagree with that just a little bit. But let me get back onto topic. And again, thank you for letting me clarify that. I agree with Shankar that if the U.S. dollar collapses, so what? California is resilient. We'll figure something out. I agree with Hal that California is relatively stable, that we can come up with a lot of different ideas. There's 40 million people in this state, and there's something that we'll end up doing that we are not even currently even thinking about. And Marcus said something about that California needs to have a plan. I definitely agree with that. We need to have a plan before we exit. And I like the whole Cal-E, the digital currency. That is a great idea. I think that California should eventually try to push for a global currency. I think that California will not be alone on that. That's something that I think a lot of people are already pushing for, especially in Europe. We are seeing that the Chinese currency is, or I think at one time was gaining a lot of traction, and I think it was pushing back against the US dollar there for a while. I don't know where that's at right now, but I know that, China's coming up, their economy is coming up, and ours is kind of slipping a little bit. Usually in history, we find that when one superpower overtakes another, there's a war, and I'm worried about that. And I think one way that we can do that, we can try to avoid that, is if California leaves. So if California leaves, it will hurt the U.S. economy because we're taking a huge chunk of that out, right? But if that makes the U.S. economy slip to the point where China overtakes it, there's no need for a war because that would have already happened. So that's one thing to kind of think about as well. But yeah, I think you guys have all made a lot of good points. I think the California Bank is something that's going to be necessary. I think that we should already be doing that. That's something that we should have been doing 30 years ago. We should have a California banking system, a state banking system that can go out and make loans in all the small communities. That's what we need right now. So with that, I'll end it there. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
I'd like to respond real quick.
So wait, now it's your turn, Marcus, anyway, so go ahead.
Oh, is there anybody else?
No, everybody has spoken unless someone, we can come back around after if someone has some.
Okay.
But you haven't.
Just to respond to Joe Payne's concerns. Again, thank you for bringing that up, Joe. And I hope everybody took a lesson from Joe. You can push back. You can say, I don't agree. This isn't a cult. We're open to that. I do want to repeat, there is no combined rule-making body. There are 4 groups: CFC, IC, CNP, and SCA. If you join one of those 4, they kind of can tell you, you can say this. The California independence movement is a concept. It is not a group. CalExit is a concept. California independence is a concept. Nobody can force you to say anything. If you want to be a California independence movement supporter or CalExit supporter or whatever. So all that's happening is that this specific conference and nothing else, just the CalExit conference, just the CalExit conference, just the CalExit conference is saying, hey, this conference is taking the stance of this and this. If you don't want to support those things, you don't have to. And just because the CalExit conference did, doesn't mean that IC does, or yes, or CNP, or that anybody has to do that. So I just want to make that clear. This is just a declaration for just this conference. It does not apply to anyone outside of this conference, and in no way is anyone in the position to do what's called combined messaging. A lot of people say, well, the movement shouldn't do this and the movement shouldn't do that. I agree with you, but nobody listens to me. Our best chance to get combined messaging is called the California Independence Movement website. And I would encourage you all to reach out to Hal Lohr, because Hal is the person trying to bring all 4 groups together on the same page. If you want to have combined messaging, which we do not have combined messaging, please work with Hal on the website. So until we get there, nobody can tell you what to do at all. Okay, glad that that's settled. Now, moving on to the banking.
Marcus, just on that point, I just want to say this to Joe also. California independent movement was actually started. I came up with the idea and talked to Marcus about it because of exactly this topic that we're talking about. Every organization has their own point of views, their own way, and it was a way to bring everybody into one organization. But that doesn't mean you have to have one particular thought or this or that. It was to bring everybody with different thoughts, just like you, Joe, that says, that's too harsh of a stance or whatever. It was to bring everybody because we respect, this is exactly what I respect, so I don't want to come out the other way. I respect everybody's opinion, and whatever opinions can be brought that work, that do that, I would never exclude anyone. That's what CIM is. It doesn't exclude anyone. It's for everybody. And this is just a particular thing, but it's to bring everyone, which we've had this problem since the beginning, the inception of California Independent, is that everybody has different views. Many organizations have fought against each other. They've crumbled. They've just exploded, imploded. So Marcus and I and everybody in this group said, what can we do to bring everybody together and have them have their own opinions and their own organization? And we came up with the California Independent Movement. In general, anybody that's for California being independent, no matter how you want to get it, if you don't agree that the U.S. is bad, but you think California would be better, great. There's a lot of the independent California believes that. There's a lot of people that believe that. It's great. It's just to combine everybody. And I just wanted to tell you, I came up with a concept because of that, because of these different views of people arguing that, I don't think we should do this. We think that. So I just wanted to let you know that for me, your opinion is very important. But like Marcus said, this was here so that we don't get into topics on this conference, particularly, of all these different views that people are going to bring in, and they're going to kind of muddy the waters of the topics that we're talking about. That's the only thing. And it's like you said, we're not radical. You have your opinions. You can say whatever. I'm not going to shut you down all the time because you have a different opinion. But it's just a guideline for that. It's a guideline for this conference. Now, if you have your conference, you could have your guideline and say, you know what? I don't want anybody talking about the U.S. Be broken. I don't believe that. That's not a good thing. And then I would come on your conference and say, I'm not going to talk about U.S. being broken. I respect that's not the point. We're going to talk about independent California on its own without the U.S. So I just wanted to make that clear, Joe. That this is very open. It's not a cult, like Marcus said. It's a movement of many different views, and this conference is just part of one. And I'm going to give it to Hannah real quick because she wants to say something.
Yeah. Oh, first I want to remind you that I posted online that check out the Zoom group chat. Bill Moyers, who was press secretary under Lyndon Johnson and has been on PBS more times than I've had hot dinners, said that democracy in America has been a series of narrow escapes. We may be running out of luck and no one is coming to save us. For that, we have only ourselves. His article is saying, yeah, this may be the end. And that's Bill Moyers this afternoon.
Please share that.
I did. It's on. The link is on Zoom group chat. Okay.
Okay.
Now, yeah. Well, hey, I mean, that's Bill, and that's the point we have to make. I'm not. That's okay. I just want to say that while we don't want to, group mess. First thing, point out, reminded everybody what Marcus had said before. We're trying to create videos that people are going to watch on their own. So I'm sure you turn off MSNBC too when you get two people who are just keep talking over each other and start shouting at each other, and the host doesn't step in, and that's just two people. And when you get 9 people doing it, then you just it's no fun at all to watch. So that's why we have the order. But the third thing I want to say is, while I want to, and I probably need to write this out, but I would strongly urge people not to ever create a public impression that we as California independence movement people want to see more chaos in the United States of America, want to see or basically want to wreck America, or that we want to see more chaos in California. And the reason why I say that is because I study history enough to know that if you go look around a lot of other national independence movements, you tend to get to this state where reformers and people seeking to create stability get attacked because of somebody who says that there's some radical solution is more important. And oftentimes that even leads to murder. And so I don't even want to start that. I think that it should be foregone conclusion. We want stability in California, and we want stability on our own borders. And the only question is if that's simply not in our power, and violence and chaos and disorder and instability break out. I think then that's the question. But I don't think we should try to encourage it or suggest, or even make the impression that we're trying to encourage it. We're not to be cheerleaders in the demise of the United States of America.
Well said.
That's all I have to say. I think it's just tactically not a good idea and could lead to disaster. Thank you.
Well said, Hannah. I mean, very well said. So I'm going to hand it over. Marcus, you're the only one that hasn't talked about that, and I'll let you finish with it.
Yeah, and then let me just say this, and then I have a special note right after, and I'll give people a chance to give special notes. So thank you very much. In 2011, I published the book, California's Next Century, that was changed to California's Next Century 2.0 the next year. In that book, 8 to 7 years ago, I talked about how Hong Kong was a model for California independence. Namely that Hong Kong, when they were trying to become independent from England and be reattached to China, one of the concerns they had was how do they maintain their independence? How do they make sure they're still part of the Western world and not completely under the control of China? Well, one of the things that Hong Kong figured out was a currency board. So Hong Kong had to take in Chinese money, yuan. And the way they kind of buttressed that so that China couldn't just dominate their economy was they created 3 separate banks in Hong Kong, in addition to the yuan coming in. They controlled these 3 banks. Some of them created their own currencies. In addition, they let the British pound in. This allowed them to basically say, okay, China, we're going to take a lot of your currency, but don't think that you can flood the market with cheap yuan or raise the interest rates and we just have to do whatever you want. We're no longer at your mercy. We have 3 independent banks and we have foreign currency also here. When you link your entire economy to one currency and you don't have control of it, those people can destroy your economy. So there's something called the optimum currency theory. It's called the optimum currency theory. It's called the optimum currency theory, also known as optimum currency area. What this says is that dollars move in space electronically or in physical space like any sort of material, trucks or cars or whatever. And so when the federal government in Washington, D.C., clear across the other side of the continent says, we're going to release more dollars, or we're going to pull back on dollars. We're going to inflate the money supply, or we're going to reduce inflation. They're doing that based upon what they see in Washington, D.C. By the time the money gets to California, our economy is needing the total opposite monetary stimulation that the Fed Reserve based in Washington, D.C. said. So California gets out of recessions before America. California goes into recessions before America. That means that what's going on here in D.C. isn't necessarily what's going on here in California. Because we're part of the same currency area, we don't have our own optimum currency area. I'm not the only one talking about this. Multiple economists have said California having to take dollars based upon a Federal Reserve decisions based in DC is horrible for our economy. The Federal Reserve raises inflation or doesn't based upon what they need, not what we need. Economists pointed this out in the 2001 recession. In fact, the Recession in California in 2003 was directly caused by the Federal Reserve. Economists are straight up saying the Federal Reserve tanked the California economy 2003, 2001, because our economy was overheating from the tech boom. So the Federal Reserve allowed even more inflation, which was bad for us. And then when it was bad, they said we need to come down on that. They immediately contracted the dollars, which caused the recession here in California. So straight up, Federal Reserve in total control of the money we have here in California caused the recession in 2001. Economists have noted this for 70 years, that California is not the same optimum currency area as the rest of America. Also because we're based upon international trade at 40 to 60%, while America is only 10 to 15%. We have a different economy. We're on the other side of the continent. We lose being part of a dollar configuration completely under control of the federal government. So I would suggest that California becoming independent or moving to independent, get out of that. And we follow the Hong Kong model. We treat America the way Hong Kong did China. Okay, we will have to use your US dollars, but we're also going to bring in euros. And we're also going to bring in Chinese yuan. And we're also going to bring in special drawing rights from the International Monetary Fund. America, you don't control the euro, the yuan, or the IMF. So now we have 4 currencies in California, only one of which America controls. That means our economy is independent from Federal Reserve monetary policy because we're not dependent on just US dollars. If America does something with dollars we don't like say raise the interest rates or increase inflation, we can go to the Federal Reserve as Californians and say, hey, we don't like that policy. And the Federal Reserve can say, screw you guys in California, we're doing what works for DC. Okay, Federal Reserve, we're going to increase our inflow of euros, Chinese yuan, and IMF to insulate ourselves from your dollar policy. So you no longer have control over the California economy. I would like to point out that Professor Walter Williams on this conference call just pointed out half an hour ago that the people called the Americans in 1776 also created a currency board to insulate themselves from control of the British pound by bringing in Spanish money and French currency. I would also point out that there's a little place that a lot of people don't like talking about called Donetsk. Donetsk is a breakaway province in Ukraine. I'm not talking about the politics, but I would encourage people to look at that. Donetsk had to use the Ukrainian money, which is worth garbage now in Europe. The way they insulated themselves was they took on American dollars, euros, and Russian rubles. They have no control over currency, but they were able to make it so that America and the EU couldn't cripple them with currency manipulation by introducing additional currencies. California can do this. So American Revolutionary Fathers did this, Hong Kong did it, Donetsk did it. That's 3 examples spanning 2 centuries. I think it's a good model. Additionally, get it through. The American dollar has the value that it does because of 2 reasons. One, if you want to sell oil between any 2 countries, you have to use dollars. Additionally, if you want to sell any international trade between any country, you have to use dollars. So even when Iran says, I hate you, America, and I want to work with Venezuela, and Venezuela says, I hate you, America, they still use US dollars to trade amongst themselves, okay? So even all of America's enemies have to use the US dollars. When nobody has to use US dollars to buy oil or trade goods, the US dollar will collapse. Gonna happen. The US dollar is arbitrarily inflated in value because they are able to force everybody around the world to use US dollars for all their oil and international trade. When that's gone, that inflated value will disappear and you will have the real value of the US dollar. That's like 20 to 30% overinflated value now. That's going to be economic collapse. Just telling you. So recently, China and Russia have agreed to not use US dollars for trade or oil. Brazil and China also made that agreement. Europe and China made that agreement. England and China made that agreement. Iran and China and Russia and Brazil also made that agreement. So that's 60% of the future global economy, already removing the dollar from international trade. I'd also like to refer to you to what the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and all of the top economists in California have said. In 20 years, China is going to be running this whole thing. So for the last 100 years, 60 to 80% of all global wealth was concentrated in the West: Japan, America, Europe. By 2030 to 2040, 60% of all global wealth will be in Asia and not in Europe or America. Last century, 80% of all wealth was in the West. Next century, 40% of all wealth. So we're going into a century where Western, English, European-based people will not own the majority of the money or the majority of the economy, and they will not be in charge of economic policy or monetary policy. Gonna happen. America can do nothing to stop this at all. So, California, do we wait for the dollar to blow up in our face? Or do we recognize what every economist on earth has said? The Chinese yuan will replace the US dollar in the next 20 years as the dominant currency. Perhaps we should attach ourselves to that now, instead of when we have the options and China's looking for friendly players. You go to a bank, when that bank just opened and you open an account, you get a free toaster and a really good loan. You go to that bank a year later, when they already have all customers, and you say, I want a loan and a free toaster. And they say, we don't give anything free, and the interest rates just went up 20% because we're not looking for new customers. Probably a good idea for California to reach out to that China bank and be friends now. Also, be friends with the International Monetary Reserve so we can bring on a special drawing right. You do not have to be a foreign country to have SDR. There are sub-governments that already have SDR. So the dollar ain't going to work in the future. The majority of the global economy will be in Asia. California is perfectly situated because we have the highest population of Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, Indians, every Asian person on earth outside of their own country here. If we simply let them use the currencies here, and we said that we would control and allow Chinese yuan along with the dollar and the euro and the IMF, we could insulate ourselves from America and China and just worry about making jobs and not worry about what happens to the global economy. And by the way, in 2014, the California government already removed the law in California that says you have to use US dollars. So in 2014, California's government already changed our constitution in California saying you do not have to use US dollars to pay off debts. Effectively, we're already free from having to use American money to pay off debts in California. That's already law. I'll leave it there.
Marcus, quick question for you. Where does California public banking come into this? Would you have that too?
Yeah, so California passed a law about saying you could pursue a public bank in a local community, like Sacramento, Oakland, etc. Big thing. There was an additional law that has been stalled in California, but is on the books, and that is for a commerce bank, basically a California national bank that would be under the control of the California government, would be able to take California tax payments. So not even your federal tax payments. If Californians just sent their California state tax payments to the California bank, that bank would be the 5th largest bank in the planet within one day. So not even federal taxes. You just put everybody's state taxes into one bank, that bank's already one of the biggest on earth. And then it's large enough to basically control currency flows or buy currency. And it would effectively operate as a central national bank for California. The interesting thing is that it would not be the Federal Reserve, which is a private corporation. This California bank would be owned by Californians and have to serve California public, not make profits for bankers. We don't know who they are. That legislation is being pursued by Ben Hueso, That's Hueso, Ben Hueso. And Joe Payne was absolutely right. We need to get that bank up and running yesterday.
My understanding is that Los Angeles and San Francisco are the ones who are focusing on on starting a bank, and of course, the two largest cities. And the idea, as I understand it, is that mostly the city government it'll be open to the public, and everyone can put their own money in. But I guess it's the idea that the government will be able to use that, put its funds in there, deposit and draw from them, and that's the idea. So the profits from that bank remain in the community. The question I want to bring up, the reason why I'm opposed strongly to China is because it's not a democracy, and it's particularly not a place with a free press. And if you don't have a free press, you don't have an economy you can rely upon. I mean, that's why we have insider trading, people. Insider trading is trading on securities with information other people do not have. And the whole idea of a free market is that you have universal access to information. If everyone has access to the same information, then everyone has an equal chance to profit from the market. That's at least the theory. And it seems to me that since China doesn't allow freedom for a free press, and certainly and there's just endless numbers of examples of journalists who have run afoul of some politician somewhere, it's just too dangerous to rely on the Chinese. But the last point I make is the fact that as long as United States currency is required to pay federal taxes, I don't see how you can have more than one currency in the state of California. If I'm a small business owner, I need to have dollars in order to pay the taxes, so the federal government doesn't come along and arrest me. So, Marcus, I mean, it's all very well. I'm well aware that, yeah, I know this. I read that state California passed a law for some reason, and I do not know, allowing Bitcoin to be used to pay off debts to the state government. But that doesn't do anything about the federal government, and we're still under the federal government.
So to respond, yes, you still have to pay federal taxes, but let's consider that small business owner. The small business owner buys meals for their family. They go out in the community, buy goods to run their store. Only a fraction of the money that they ever use actually goes to the federal government to pay federal taxes. If we look at the amount of money they spent in a year, federal taxes is only a small percentage. So keep the US dollars and allow them to pay federal taxes with US dollars, absolutely. But you could also allow them to have other currencies. Also, I do want to point something out. China is a repressive government. China is a repressive government. China is a repressive government. Global economists have said, no matter what, by 2030 to 2040, 60 to 80% of the economy will be in Asia. That don't matter if they're a democracy or not. So harsh realities to deal with, people. You're right. They are a repressive economy, and they're going to be running things no matter what in 20 years. That's a reality we as Californians are going to have to deal with.
Okay, I want to give Walter a chance. He's been raising his hand for a while. Go ahead, Walter.
By this time, several quick things. First, I agree with Hannah that we should not use a violent revolution as the model. More look at the model of when Norway seceded from Sweden in 1904. It was done without violence. When the Czech Republic and Slovakia separated from the former government of Czechoslovakia and created two new governments, it was done without violence. So there are numerous examples in history, including recent history, where secessions have successfully occurred without violence. Okay, so so next, I agree totally with what Marcus said, actually both Marcuses, but the points that Marcus made in the last two statements that he made. My question would be, what could people do at this point to help move that trend along of creating, some independent California economy? For example, in investments, people that have pension funds or IRAs or whatever, could they be putting them in? Do we have a list of stocks or municipal bonds or what? I don't know. If somebody that knows more about economics than I do, come up with some suggestions of where people could put their money in places that are not going to be subject to these kinds of I agree with Marcus. I think it's going to be dollar collapse and hyperinflation coming very soon. And so, what could we do to save our retirement funds while at the same time helping to give a financial boost to the independent California movement? And I just wonder, in terms of federal taxes, if payment of taxes could be the crisis that actually provokes the secession. That if massive numbers of people just simply do not pay their federal taxes, but instead send them to the California Tax Board or whatever organization is going to send this up, that it in and of itself could be the trigger for independence.
Anyone want to respond to that or have
Can I say
further
something?
comments? Yeah, Joe.
Can I piggyback off of that? I just wanted to bring up an idea. Okay, right now, Californians, and I believe all Americans, we pay directly to the federal government our taxes every year. If we could, as Californians, change that, where we pay to our banking system, and the banking system pays the government our taxes for us, right? If we can get on that system, and then when California wants to leave, we can just cut that off.
Interesting.
I don't know, just an idea.
Yeah, interesting.
Anybody have any ideas for investments?
What do you mean by that?
Where could you put your money that would help to promote an independent California economy?
I still think it comes down to, I'll send the link out, but there is a bill by Ben Hueso, which was, so when they were talking about public banking in California, they had two laws, one to make the little municipal banks, and then one to make a gigantic super bank that would pull them all together, and you could directly put tax money into. They couldn't get this passed, so it stalled in the legislature, but it is a super bank that would pull all these banks together, and you could directly put California taxes into. The law that's passed now only says, hey, LA local taxes can go into this bank, not federal, not California taxes, only local LA taxes. So they're already limited in the amount of value they can pump into their bank by law. We need that other law by Ben Hueso. It was covered in the video, 10 things California can do to secede right now, and I'll make sure to send that out to everybody.
Great.
But is there something that exists right now that people could put their money into that will help to promote an independent California economy?
Yeah,
I would just say logically into anything environmental like solar, like things like that would help California industry would make sense to me.
There are a number of socially progressive investment operations. Working assets is the granddaddy of them all. There's a whole bunch of those devoted to that.
Do they
But
do they focus on California specifically?
I don't think they focus on California though. And yeah, I like I said, I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't know. I think that's about all there is. I mean, you could in theory start something like a California investment fund or something like that, and a hedge fund, because anybody can start a hedge fund if you can pass all the Securities Exchange Commission rules, because it's federally regulated. And you don't want to be Jacob Wool, who is looking at 5 or 10 whenever they finally get him in prison. But other than that, I mean, what I do think about is that the Securities Exchange Commission recently dramatically changed crowdfunding. But again, now you're talking about investing in risky businesses, and you're talking about something entirely different. You're talking about investing in secure industries, secure securities for steady growth. And I think you're pretty limited in your choices, because by nature, a secure investment should be diverse, right? You don't just put all your. We all know the person whose entire retirement fund was in General Motors stock, and is now in dire straits, because they invested in the 1970s and 80s. So I think that you have to have a diverse investment, and I think it's just I mean, CA could, of course, CA has one of the most diverse economies and could always could probably be that stability, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm thinking about up in Washington State where, because I actually have kin from Washington State, right? And, and during the Vietnam War period, boy, the economy is going great. Boeing was making all kinds of ships, of airplanes and stuff for both the military and the civilian market. And then that fell apart and all kinds of people lost their jobs. And then Microsoft came along and a lot of software businesses came along and Boeing kind of came back a little bit. So it's really hard to imagine to have the diversity to have a secure investment just in California. But you as an individual can certainly use your money to promote the local economy through all kinds of things. I just wouldn't be looking for the most secure investment in the world. So it'd be a little bit like going to the track. You only want to invest what you can lose, right?
All right, Matt wants to say something, so go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, well, that is some very strong arguments both for independence in general and for our own public bank in particular, because public banks, that's what they do. They sell securities. And those securities can have a tremendous impact. Give you a couple of examples. Of course, the most outstanding one is T-bills and T-bonds that the U.S. government sells to the Federal Reserve. And what tends to happen is when other forms of investment fail, the treasuries are considered to be a safe haven for investment. So they go temporarily, go get some T-bills and T-bonds. And then when they're ready to diversify the portfolio, they sell those and re-diversify. The euro is totally backed by euro security issues. Okay, so that's how they take money out of circulation as the ECB, European Central Bank, is to sell those securities. So we would be doing the same thing to back our currency and also be able to have the portfolio of those securities issued by our public bank in everybody's portfolio. So we can help to stabilize the international economy and at the same time, get our currency out there. It can be done. There are concrete examples. The EU is probably the most outstanding example. We can do currency swaps. That's how the yuan is getting out there. These are all things we can do, but taxation is absolutely correct. As long as we're part of the U.S. can insist on being paid federal taxes in its currency. The only way that we are going to put a stop to that is with our independence, to where U.S. citizens, and we all start out dual citizenship, don't we, are not required to pay to them, or if they wish to, they can pay to California's bank, which can then go ahead and dig out of its dollar tranche and say, here's a bundle of bucks, that we've got in our accounts, and we're going to go ahead and pay you, Tio Sam, and settle accounts that way. But of course, when we do that, we're selling dollars, aren't we? Okay, we're putting them dollars out there for them to go get. So, currency swaps can be a tricky thing. That's why, you know, that's why they teach it in courses on international trade and finance. It can be tricky, but it can be done. It has been done. Again, when the dollar ceased being convertible to $35 an ounce gold, 1971, what did the IMF do? They went to a basket of currencies, a special drawing right. When, you know, the Europeans had a bunch of these dollars and they were using for settlement of accounts between each other. Say Germany and Italy, they got an imbalance. They each dig out their dollar tranche and it goes one way, then it can go the other. But it was, again, totally dependent on the value of the US dollar. So the US dollar has been floated. That's why the US can borrow indefinitely, because everybody takes its money. When that starts curtailing, which it already is, by the way, that curtails their ability to borrow infinitely. So basically, yes, we do need independence, very much. And one of the pillars of that independence would be our bank getting our currency out there. Okay, so that we can have our imports paid for in our own currency, not dependent on what the Fed does or does not do. And of course, taking the Russian example, the flip side of that is that we would accept payments for our exports in their currency to the countries we're exporting to. If we're exporting to the EU, we'll take euros. If we're exporting to China, we take yuan. All we would ask in return is that when we import from the EU, for China, from Japan, from wherever, they take calories, just like we're taking their currency. It's a currency swap agreement. That is how China took advantage of the fact that Russia's not part of OPEC. OPEC still sets its prices in dollars, which means that the Chinese got to go slip back and dig into their dollar tranche from their earnings and exports to the US and pay it to OPEC until they start to have other agreements. And the Europeans have had to do the same thing. Dig into your dollar tranche. Well, if you got your currency accepted and the EU is starting to do this and the Chinese are looking at it, then basically you're undermining the practice of the OPEC pricing its price of oil in dollars.
Matt, I'm going to cut off the time because we're running short. Yeah. I'm going to give just to end this conversation. I see Hal wants to say something, but I'm going to give everybody just a minute to sum up this so that we can wrap up just the finance of it. Hal, go for it. Hold on, let me unmute you there. I'm going to unmute everybody actually, and you'll have a minute each if you want.
Actually, what I was going to point out is that all the other models are fine. The principal issue that's going on here though is that with a California National Bank that we control our own currency doesn't necessarily mean we have to have our own currency. We can control our currency without actually having it, or control the currency manipulation. Also, being where we are globally, where we are situated, regardless of what we talk about what happened in the rest of the world, our principal use on this will be import-export between the U.S. and Asia and the Asian markets, which is almost strictly an import, Now, I mentioned this before, and I'll elaborate for just a second. A very small tax put on every transaction by California, where the money from it coming from the United States goes into our bank as a monetary fund, means that in very short order, we will be holding more dollars than is passing through our hands. At that moment, it doesn't matter what the Fed does. We control the dollar because we control the principal route of trade. So unless America can start importing computers and TVs and clothing and everything else from Africa or somewhere else in the world, every dollar they spend on Chinese goods strengthens a California bank's grip on the U.S. economy. much the way the Dutch did in Europe in the 1600s and 1700s. Any student of that will, you know, go look up the Fuggers. That's a simple. The other point that I'll make in closing, and this is my final point. Our California exit movement in general, we talk about manipulation, or we're talking about the facts. And Joe, I appreciate your advice and opinions. But talking about the U.S. collapse is not an opinion. I mean, we're watching a historic problem go on in America, and between the divisions and the economics and what have you. I don't think it's being negative just to point that out. It's not being negative to point something out that everybody sees, even though some people don't like it. On top of that, the other thing that we've seen basically since the last couple of conferences is that while the U.S. government itself seems to be spinning, for lack of a better term, California's government is stable. Our state government is stable. And the question mark goes, when we see California independence, it is more and more looking like it will come through the state house in general. It's looking more and more with the leadership being displayed there, and with the talk and with the language that's coming from there, that initiatives and what have you are good, but I think that right now the inside track to see an independent California will basically come when our state officials who are there now, in our government that is there now, basically stop and go, enough, we can't do this. We're not going to preside over the collapse of California as America goes down. That's what I see, and forgive me, that's an opinion. But I think there's enough evidence. I mean, even just watching the nightly news, to at least give some credence to that argument. And I'll step off at that.
Thank you. Anyone else, real quick, to sum up? Go for it, Bob.
Well, first I want to say that I agree with Hal, but on the issue, if we can charge fees going through our ports, imports and exports, certainly could collect a lot of money, and sure could fund that bank very quickly. But the issue would be Oregon and Washington. They have ports there too. So we've got a compact with Oregon, Washington, also Nevada and Colorado. But what matters is Oregon and Washington for this COVID. We're basically ideologically on the same page. Should we be doing something, a Pacific or West Coast compact with them, so that we say, okay, we're all going to charge fees through our ports, so they can't say, okay, well, California, we'll just send them through Seattle instead. So, I mean, right? So that's the whole thing. California obviously would be the major partner in this 3-state compact. But I think, if you have the whole West Coast ports under single control, you could charge whatever you want. That bank will become the biggest bank on the planet very quickly. So that's what I'm thinking, that we probably need to be working with our neighbors to the north to really make this work.
Just a quick point again, I'll get off. Yes, or actually Oregon doesn't really have a port.
Right, but
Washington does, Seattle, but it's not nearly able to handle what we handle here.
Right, no, it can't handle.
So it would be impractical for the United States to basically turn to Washington and say, can you handle the whole thing? The trick would be simply to make sure that Washington is A, on board, and B, that the fees that we charge don't have to be excessive.
Right.
They don't have to be excessive. We don't have to gouge. I mean, honestly, we could just say that it's only a couple of points on the margin would do everything that we've talked about. We're talking about $6 trillion in trade coming through Los Angeles and Long Beach alone. So how much percentage of that does California need to stay financially solvent, on top of everything else we have?
Right.
No step. So it's like, yes, it would be better with a compact with Washington and Oregon, And this would be happening after independence. And we can't charge them now because we're not a separate country. But I'm off.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. Read the U.S. Constitution, it specifically says states cannot levy duties of tonnage. So we're allowed to, as I understand the law, and we covered this in law school, is that obviously when your airplane lands at LAX, the airline has to pay a certain fee, but that fee is only used to maintain the LAX airport. It's not to be put into the general fund. And I think the Supreme Court's position on that's pretty serious about that. That's so. Yeah, it would be. You're right about CA having a competitive advantage there, but it's just not constitutional. So there you go. I just want to point out add to the point that Hal said though about California leaders deciding to that we've had enough and we're not as leaders of California are not going to preside over the demise of the California is absolutely right. This is why I think Governor Newsom keeps using the phrase nation state, because he's got in the back of his mind. You can imagine, just try to imagine Gavin gets up in the morning every morning while he's brushing his teeth, and he's thinking, what fresh hell is going to break out in the other 49 states today, right? So I have to think that's what he's thinking, even though he will never say it, and we shouldn't push him on it. But I think that he's well aware that he's president, he's governor of a superpower in limbo. Or in utero.
Okay, Walter, quick.
Yes, Marcus is well familiar with my position that I think what I believe it was Bob or Hal just said about the need to combine with Washington, Oregon, Nevada, and I would suggest Hawaii as well, and possibly Alaska. That we should be working in consort with activists in those states to come up with some kind of collaborative effort here that would make it all more successful. I think we've got two issues that need to be researched. One is, how would you finance this new government? And secondly, what could be done right now in terms of what I asked earlier about investments or anything like that, to invest specifically in the California, or in the case of Washington, Oregon people, invest up there, so that we can start to wean ourselves economically away from this collapsing US dollar and US economy. That I agree with the statements that this is a fact. This is not an opinion. This is a fact that things are unraveling, and I think we're going to be seeing hyperinflation with the U.S. dollar. And so, what tangible things could be done? I'd like to see somebody who has, economic or accounting or financial investment background to be able to make some recommendations that could be put on the website to let people put their money where their mouth is, and also to give an idea of how exactly we're going to finance this new government in a way that will be successful.
I can respond. I want to respond to that briefly. It's number one.
Quickly, Anna, because
this will be very brief. First thing, you interrupted me. I don't have any troubles with financing government. We already have one. That's the key. Why I keep insisting on maintaining California as an entity to itself. We already have a government. It's just a matter of expanding its responsibilities dramatically, rather quickly, but it can be handled. But the question I have, though, for Walter is, why does he insist that hyperinflation for the United States dollars in the future? You would have to be a situation in which you don't have enough goods to be produced, and the price of them goes way up. And or that, transportation to being so disrupted that goods are not, I don't know. I'm just curious why he's so convinced that it would happen, because the time when inflations occurred was shortly after the Second World War, and Japan is a place I know where it was really bad. and also, of course, in Germany was different because in Germany, the hyperinflation was largely due to forced foreign payments. And in fact, the government of Germany actually launched hyperinflation in order to reduce the impact of war reparations. And neither of those situations do I see being
Well, what I was
on the horizon.
what I was basing my thoughts on is just the amount of borrowing that the U.S. is doing, including the borrowing and increasing the debt for the COVID response. That at some point, it's just going to become unstable, and I think we're rapidly approaching that point. I don't see it in comparison to Weimar Germany as much as I see it in comparison, say, to Argentina, or someplace that had hyperinflation.
Yeah,
so
but I don't know. I don't know. I'd have to study that a little closer, but I don't see how. Okay, if the United States government has difficulty paying paying inflation interest on the debt, I see that as being a political tool in order to drastically cut social spending. I don't see it. It would be unlikely that the United States government would inflate its currency in order to make it easier to pay off the debt. That's exactly where we get hyperinflation from.
We don't have to.
Sorry, Marcus, we're off topic.
Daniel.
Yeah, we're off topic now.
Hey, yeah, I need to say one thing and then I have to go. So I would suggest, let me say one thing and then let's wrap it up.
I'm going to let you end it. I just want to say one more thing that wasn't part of this, but I want to end it with that. On my part is if you can support the initiative that Marcus has put out with small amounts or any big, please do so, because this is a huge moment for us, the initiative. So I just want to say that. I've sent out emails to everybody. Just contact Marcus if you can make any type of contribution, because he has put in a huge chunk of money, $1,000 already of his money. And so I pledged 200. I know some other people have pledged some money.
Walter did.
Whatever you can afford will help. So please do that. And now
I'm doing mine as a matching. So when people come forward, I will match it.
Okay.
Awesome.
Awesome, Walter. Awesome. Bravo, Walter.
Awesome.
Great. So Marcus, I'll let you end this.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you all for coming out. I know we have more conversations. Look, everybody has each other's contact information. Go ahead and carry out the conversations. We just like to have short, little, succinct videos for this. So please don't stop talking. Call each other, contact each other. This is just the end of this conference. We'll be back for the next one. So real quick, couple facts. Let me see that. It's called AB 750 by Ben Hueso, Hueso. AB 750, State Bank, Ben Hueso. Ben Hueso, AB 750, State Bank. That's the thing that creates a national bank here in California. The legislation has been stalled, but it's there. That's how we have our national bank. Second thing, Pacific Exchange. Pacific Exchange. California had its own stock market. And then the New York stock market bought it out and took it away from us in the early 2000s. So there's a lot of questions on what do we need to have money running? You need a stock exchange. The Pacific Exchange needs to come back, and you need that state bank. So AB 750, Ben Hueso, Pacific Exchange. These are the top two things that if we had going on again, boy, would we be in a great position to do everything everybody imagined today. Lastly, fact, California's foreign direct investment #1. Foreign direct investment #1, that's on the California governor's site. What that means is that in all of the world, anybody with money to invest, California, not America, is the #1 attractive place for anybody with cash to invest in. So if you're a Chinese investor, you're an Iranian investor, you're a North Korean diplomat, the #1 place everyone from around the world puts their money in is not America. It's specifically California. Type in California FDI 1. That means, well, the rest of the world knows exactly who we are, especially people with money. And they think of us already separate from America. Foreign direct investment, number one. That's a fact. Lastly, Willie Brown. That's Willie Brown. Willie Brown, CBS 2017. Willie Brown ran all of California. He started Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom. He effectively knows everyone in politics. He said on CBS TV in 2017, Willie Brown went on the air and said, let's cut off paying federal taxes. Yes, one of the largest politicians in all of California literally went on TV in 2017 and said, let's cut off federal taxes. Now, when a guy who runs the California government for decades says that, it means something. And I'll leave it there. Oh, one last fact. You'll notice I'm not trying to take an opinion on what everybody says. I'm just adding facts. Interpret how you will. No one can replace the port capacity of California. I worked in freight. I worked in the freeway department. I studied freight at the Pacific Freight Intelligence Department for Caltrans in Sacramento for 4 years. So I'm qualified to make the statement. No one comes even close, nor can they. Seattle was built out, which means they can't expand their port unless they're going to start knocking down skyscrapers. That ain't going to happen. Mm-hmm. New York has the same problem. So does Tacoma, Washington. So does New Jersey. So does Atlanta. That's why all the stuff's going through California, because they don't have any more land to expand. Here's the proof. The Chinese government is not spending money in New York or Canada or Seattle. They are buying up railroad stations in Mexico, buying ports in Mexico, and expanding the Panama Canal. That's because the Chinese government has already figured out they can't push more goods through American ports. That's why they're spending all their money in Mexico. So folks, no, Tacoma can't compete with us, or New York or Washington. If America got every single port outside of California together and said, we're going to compete with America, here's California and here's about how much they'd be able to pull off. The Chinese government knows this. That's why they're spending all their money in Mexico, because you cannot expand throughput into America outside of California. So nobody comes even close to challenging our dominance alone on the West Coast today. Facts, I'll leave it there. Thank you all for coming. Daniel, take us out, brother.
Thank you, guys. Thank you all for sticking to the rules, and great conversation. Thank you for all your input, and thank you for being here on a Saturday when you could be doing something else. So we appreciate it, and I'm going to download this video, maybe edit it into 2 parts. The first part about Minneapolis protests, and the second part financial, so that it's shorter. And Marcus will post it up and send you a link of it. Peace.
Love.
Bye.
Love.
Have a good week. Enjoy the rest of the game.
All right. Bye.